Welcome to the Scarlet Faithful podcast. I'm Aaron Breitman, back with David Anderson doing positional previews for Rutgers football ahead of the 2023 season. Today's episode is on the defensive line. Two obvious strengths of this defensive line are on either edge with Aaron Lewis and Wesley Bailey. David Anderson, what are your thoughts on both of them?
Yeah, everyone wants to talk about Aaron Lewis because of not only his play on the field, but his charisma off of it. I mean, he really impressed people with all of his recent interviews, especially on the Big Ten Network and then at Media Day. You hear all the stats. He was number one, I think, in the Big Ten in quarterback hits. He was top three in hurries, but you didn't see the sacks. I think a lot of that has to do with either quarterbacks kind of flushed away from him, maybe throwing balls away that they didn't have to take a sack because they were winning games against Rutgers. So there's a lot of different reasons you would see his physical production for sacks and tackles for loss increase. I mean, I'll be the first to admit I was a little bit overly critical of him when he first arrived at Rutgers. I felt like he got a lot of hype and his motor wasn't what we expected out of high school. But he did all of what we could have possibly expected and more last year with his performance and earning, all Big Ten honors, and he's getting a number of preseason accolades. I think that's where you start before you even get to Wesley Bailey, who has not played a lot of that much football. But when he's in a position where he can just either use his speed or power, it's very hard for opposing linemen to block him. He did kind of learn the hard way as the season went on, and they faced tougher and tougher offensive tackles. But he just feasted on weak competition. And the hope with him is that he can raise his level, which would then free up Lewis to make even more plays and keep offenses from being able to cheat at all towards Lewis's side.
Yeah, with Pro Football Focus, I thought it was interesting. Like late into last year, Lewis was very balanced with his grade, both in the pass and the run game. And they named him first team All Pro Football Focus for preseason this year. But I think his ability to draw attention. I think last year part of the problem was when he drew all that attention, no one else was really able to take advantage. And I think that's key. Early on, you're probably going to see teams trying to take him out, and then who's going to be able to step up? And Bailey, I think, especially in September with that schedule, I think he has a great opportunity to play a big role early on.
Yeah, I mean, statistically, like you said, when I look back at it, Lewis was in the top 5 basically in every category that they measured amongst defensive ends, and he was the only one that was when it came to run, pass, even coverage, which is very limited snaps, right? And then Bailey was a middle of the pack defensive end, which is pretty good, right? If that's your second guy. So then the question that we have, get more production off the edge. Will Lewis, for example, see more snaps on the inside, especially in obvious passing situations? I mean, this is the type of thing where, for our fans who are also Giants fans, like Justin Tuck, basically just played defensive end, and then once it was an obvious passing down, especially in the fourth quarter, he shifted inside, and it made the entire defensive line have another dimension. And we have a guy who we might be able to use for that's coming off of injury, if you want to talk about him next.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is kind of the X factor with the defensive line is how are they going to utilize Mo Toure coming back from injury, led Rutgers in sacks in 2020, 2021. Obviously was injured all of last year with the torn ACL. Now he comes back. You have Deion Jennings and Tyrone Powell pretty much solidified as the two starters. They're only going to probably play that two linebacker set with the 4 defensive linemen and 5 in the secondary. So I think, it makes a lot of sense to load up on the edge and have Toure there to be able to add to the depth. But also, I mean, he's a legitimate, edge rusher in his own right and has shown, he's proven in the past that he can do it.
For sure. And then behind them, even if for whatever reason something happens, one of those guys gets banged up, you do have Renee Conga, Jordan Thompson, and Kenny Fletcher. The reason I mentioned those 3 is Conga, had he been a qualifier, would have been the 16th ranked defensive end in the Big Ten, which is right around where Bailey was. They're roughly about the same place. Now, I would prefer to say Bailey was better because I think he played higher leverage snaps, probably. Yeah. So you obviously take that into consideration. But Conga really, I think, impressed everybody with. I didn't think he was going to be that fast. I thought he was going to be having to play on the inside, but he did get a lot of reps on the outside. People have had a lot of nice things to say about Fletcher, kind
Yeah.
of similar to Bailey in that he really was too thin when he first arrived on campus, but he's probably 1 year behind Bailey in terms of how effective he can be at his current weight. But there's a guy who, if he's pressed into action, it's entirely possible he could see the same production that Bailey did last year. And then Jordan Thompson, like if he's your third string type of guy, like that's a legitimate two deep Big Ten type player. And so you got to feel good, even if they get hit with injuries, that they'll have no problem. Even if they want to rotate 10 guys on the line, that should be fine with what they are bringing to the table at edge. Was there anyone else that you had your eye on? I mean,
Well,
there's
I
tons
put
of
it
other
up.
players that could be contributors at that spot.
I just think Fletcher has a ton of potential. I mean, he had those 2 sacks at the end of last year. I think he had a tackle in 11 games last year as a true freshman. So I agree with you. You know, he's got to get more consistent as well. But uh, I think it used in the right situations, I think that will be interesting to see is when they give him opportunities. I think he could be a huge factor. But yeah, I mean the depth between those four guys plus Thompson plus Conga. I mean that's six. I just think I'm a big believer that for a Big Ten defensive line to be able to be a top half of the Big Ten defensive line, to last that whole season. And we know how Rutgers has traditionally gotten worn down because a lot of times they only have, six guys on the defensive line that can play. I really think there's hope that this year they can go 10 deep.
Right. And then the other thing, when we talk competition, is that stay hungry. Some of the times what we've seen in the past when Rutgers was not going deep enough was, I'm not saying guys were necessarily taking snaps off, but you can just see a little extra juice when they are able to stay fresh and they know they got to kind of prove it every time they're on the field.
Yeah.
So, and especially at that position, more than any other position, if you lose that edge of your mindset, like you're going to get pushed around and it's not going to be what you need to do. But I don't think this team's going to have that problem for all the
Yeah.
reasons you just mentioned.
Well, and I think if you think back to those great defenses under Shiano, 2006, and even after he left 2012, I mean, guys were flying around all over the place, and that's why I love Fletcher because I feel like he kind of has that same kind of motor. Bailey does too. Aaron Lewis, obviously, I mean, he's a little bit more. I think he's as a veteran, like he kind of I think paces himself a little bit. I don't mean
It,
that.
yeah, it's more like it's controlled.
Yes,
It's like controlled action
right.
where Lewis does not have wasted steps, so it doesn't look like he's moving as fast as Bailey might come flying around the edge. Lewis
Yeah.
might be able to do the same distance in two less strides.
Yep.
That's
That's
kind of what you're saying, like
exactly.
efficiency of his movement. Yes.
Yes. Yes, very well put. But I think that yeah, I mean Rutgers has had trouble generating sacks, generating pressure, stopping running backs in their tracks, off the edge there. So yeah, I think it's a huge part of the defensive line and the defense overall. And if those guys we just spoke about can take another step forward, I think obviously it'll be a big factor. So what are your thoughts on inside now with the defensive line?
Yeah, I mean, we're really talking about five guys that have been talked about in the two deep, right? Or more so four, with Maya Hanatu,
Yep.
Isaiah Aiton. You have Zaire Angoy, who's more like he's going to get some burn like he did last year, especially in the goal line or short yardage situations. But then Keontae Hamilton and Troy Rainey, who had played offensive line 2 years ago, a couple like in the second half of the season. Those guys have had positive things said about them for the majority of camp. Uh, so what do I think? Well, Ahanatu is kind of the reverse. I think I was higher on him early than most people, but now I'm kind of a little bit more measured. I think he does a good job occupying blocks. But what I want to see with him is can he be a playmaker? Has not been a lot of plays where he's kind of like blown it up in the backfield in his
Hmm.
career. And Isaiah Aiton is an interesting one too because he brings the same type of size. Like they're both listed between 6'3", 6'4", 290, 300 pounds. But Aiton, majority of his production as a defensive end. and now he's playing inside in the Big Ten versus the SEC. So, I mean, if you look at pictures of him a year ago, he's not nearly as ripped as he wasn't nearly as ripped as he is now.
Hmm.
But from a positional standpoint, I'm not sure if there's going to be any sort of learning curve or what they're going to ask him to do. If he's just asked to take on blocks, like he's huge, so that's good. Um, but then at the same time, like between Troy Rainey, he might be in the same position. Keontae Hamilton's put on weight; he's now listed at 295, but he's a little bit more of the guy who we would expect that is a little more agility, has a little more agility in terms of getting inside.
Right.
I've several of our other like podcasters mentioned that when they first saw Keontae Hamilton, they're like, this guy is just going to be unbelievable. He kind of didn't look that way a year ago, but now with a full season of football and health, how he has not wrestled. He didn't wrestle this past year.
Right.
Maybe that's what will cause him to have that leap. So overall, I feel like the floor is fairly high, but have in a really nothing sparked this idea to us last year that these guys are going to be disruptors like you've seen in the past from the greatest of our last 25 years being Eric Foster. Like nobody has shown that, but they
Right.
have shown an ability to hold the line, occupy blocks, and free up the guys behind them. So that's one of the reasons why I think maybe in pass rushing situations they might try to sub in one of the edge guys or try to like move people down the line because we haven't. Maybe Aiton is the guy. Maybe he's going to show that explosion out of the middle to collapse the pocket. But hopefully I'm wrong because sometimes on the defensive line these guys just get stronger every year and we'll see more out of them than we expect. But that's kind of like my general synopsis. I know there's other guys in the mix as well, but like those are the top four that we've kind of been hearing in the two deep, plus Angoy, who is just a massive human in short yardage.
Yeah, one thing I like about defensive line is like I love when the leaders of the defense are on the defensive line, and between Aaron Lewis and Maya Nahanatu, I had Maya Nahanatu on the podcast recently, and I just
Yeah,
really impressed with him. And I was thinking back before you even said it when I was talking to him. I was remembering back to that play against Syracuse when he made that huge fourth quarter play, forced the fumble, and then you just kind of touched on the need to do that more. He has
right,
the
exactly.
potential, but yeah, I mean, I think the defense overall. We were talking about this offline. I mean, whatever steps the offense makes, the defense has to be able to take the ball away and generate short yardage opportunities for the offense, and just take the ball away from the offense, from the opposing offense. And I think that the defensive line, we haven't had one in a while that's been able to really kind of create havoc up front. So I think the depth is there, but I totally agree with what you just said. How, what is their ceiling in terms of being disruptive and being kind of, forcing takeaways?
Right. Whether those be sacks on third down,
Hmm.
effectively a turnover, or strip sacks, or
Deflections.
even just really just forcing the quarterback into bad throws that can ultimately be intercepted. Any of those type of things. Never mind if they can put enough fear in the quarterback that they're rushing, zone reads and things like that. I mean, that would be even more amazing. But I think that's where, like you said, not only do you want your leaders on the defensive line, anyone, any coach, anywhere would say, if I could have my best playmakers on the defensive line, that takes so much pressure off the people on the backside to just
Mhm.
do their job
Great point.
pace that they need to make their plays. So if the defensive line can speed up the offense, then everybody else can kind of play at their proper speed. So that's what I'm hoping for from this defensive line. I think it would be nice if someone could emerge as like a big time playmaker on the inside because I'm pretty confident we'll see a couple guys that do it on the perimeter
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
the
Great.
line.
Great points. I do think Eton is intriguing, and he has that relationship with Marquise Watson. He's got legitimate experience, from the SEC and Ole Miss. So I think, the fact that he has both up, they obviously have a plan, right? They know how
Right.
they want to utilize him. Can he execute it? And you would think that, yeah, to be able to blow things up in the middle would be kind of what they're thinking. So, any final thoughts on the defensive line?
I mean, I'm just looking back through my notes. The one thing I will mention to the guy you were kind of hyping up, Kenny Fletcher, he actually scored quite well in run defense. So he might be a little further ahead than we think, or the staff just did a really good job of keeping him in manageable situations
Yeah.
that were he was not just being steamrolled by opposing backs. Like so that might have been just as much on the coaching staff. Um, Sean Griffin, DJ Allen, they only had less than 5 snaps last year. So there might be somebody who comes that we didn't mention that could be a difference maker as well. But that those are just kind of the things that I would say, keep an eye out for, all the entire depth chart for this position group because we should see some flashes of brilliance.
Yeah, if the Rutgers defense is going to take a step forward, I think the defensive line has to be taking a step forward as well. Thank you for David once again for your insight and for listening and watching this episode. And look out for more positional previews here at the Scarlet Faithful.